get started. There might be some other guests who join us over the next few minutes, but so we can get ourselves going. Welcome to our online webinar. It's how to improve business performance via enterprise architecture. We'll be talking you through today. We've got Charlie, our Director of Technology, and Leah, our Interim CTO from BRE, who'll be taking you through everything today. So we've got an hour in. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Charlie to take us forward. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, morning, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm sure there's people on the call who do and people on the call who don't. I am Charlie Lee. I'm Director of Technology for Cielo Costa. Been working in the technology industry for over 20 years. Used to be a solution architect and a developer before that. Came into Microsoft, around SharePoint as a SharePoint developer back in the day. So yeah, lots of experience in and around Microsoft technologies and platforms and solutions. So that's me. I'm just going to throw over to Leah, who's joining us today as a guest speaker, and she can introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm interim CTO at BRE. I've been at BRE for 2 years, just over 2 years now, and that's where the relationship with Cielo Costa started. So I'm looking forward to the webinar this morning with everybody here. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. It's a little bit of sort of housekeeping and participation notes. So if anyone has got any questions on any of the content that we cover in the webinar, the Q&A feature is enabled on the meeting, so feel free to just post your questions in there. We're hoping to get some time at the end to go through questions and answers, but if we don't get a chance to do that, then we will follow up on all questions that are asked and supply answers to everyone who's joined the webinar today. If while the webinar is going on, if you have any thoughts either during or after, you can use the hashtag CCEA webinar on any social media, and then we'll be able to track that hashtag and have a look at what people are saying. And once the event is finished, we will be issuing links to a copy of the video and a copy of the presentation, so that you can obviously look at it after the fact. There is a lot of content. I mean, it's not death by PowerPoint by any means, but there is a lot of content in here, and there's a lot of depth behind the content. So obviously, if you do want to review it in your own time, that would be great. You can do that because you'll have a copy. In terms of goals and objectives for today's session, because this is such a big area, we're really only covering it in sort of lightweight overview. We're going to look at the benefits of governance in general. We're going to look at an insight into enterprise architecture governance specifically, with some sort of practical examples. So it's not going to be too much in the theoretical side. There is a lot of practical examples as well, and obviously Leah's here to sort of add some real weight to it in terms of how it's been applied in reality. I'm going to introduce you to our lightweight approach to enterprise architecture, and then we'll highlight some practical applications with Leah about how we've actually implemented it with customers. And then at the end, we'll offer a path for you guys in terms of how you get started if you want to implement something similar in your organizations. So the first thing we sort of need to cover off is what is enterprise architecture? So what are we actually here to talk about? Well, there's a few things that might resonate with you depending on your role in your organization, but some of the reasons why maybe this webinar has been of interest to you are on this slide here. So maybe you've implemented a costly IT system only to find that it doesn't actually meet the needs of the business. So maybe it doesn't get adopted. Maybe you feel like you wasted the investment. Maybe you found out that departments in the organization are using software you weren't aware of, or cloud services you weren't aware of, which is obviously creating security risks. And in terms of your control over your IT environment, that makes things very challenging. You might find that you've got challenges in maintaining consistency around things like security and compliance. You may be a highly regulated industry. You might have to continually keep up to date with regulatory requirements, legislative requirements. Maybe you've struggled to scale a new system because you weren't really anticipating the level of demand that it might have. Maybe you've experienced issues with data duplication across multiple systems, inconsistent reporting. All of these kind of common challenges can, in some respect, be addressed or at least identified earlier through good enterprise architecture, and in particular, good architectural governance over these things. So enterprise architecture, when we talk about it, is the discipline of aligning your business capabilities. So what does your business actually do with the technologies and your technology strategy? So with the technologies that you have in the company, how do they align to what your business actually needs to do? So when you look purely at the business in terms of either the things that you produce, the services that you provide, whatever it is that your business does, when you look purely at those things, what are the technologies that support those needs? Because ultimately that's why you have those tools and technologies. They're all there to enable the business. So the approach that we're presenting today is basically a tool for guiding an organization's transformation. So helping you adapt to change in different business environments. So this is not, in any particular vertical. This is a horizontal approach. It can be applied in any particular industry. And there are 5 key layers to enterprise architecture that we look at. So there is business architecture, which is the organizational strategy, the goals that you need to achieve. There's the application architecture. So that's the current and future state of the applications and software that you have. You've got the data architecture. So that's the data and information that's actually held within those systems. You've got the technology architecture, which is the hardware, the software, the licensing, all of the things, the actual components that comprise solutions that you might build for particular business needs. And then there's the security architecture. So what are the requirements around security? How do you ensure that your organizational security policies are actually being adhered to within solutions, implementations of software, things that the business is introduced to? So I call this not quite TOGAF. So for anyone who's familiar with enterprise architecture, you may have heard of TOGAF. So the Open Group produce what is probably the industry standard for enterprise architecture. So the Open Group Architecture Framework, or TOGAF, is the industry. It's a bit like Prince2 for those of you who are familiar with project management methodologies. So what commonly happens is people know what TOGAF is, they're certified in it, but the realities of actually implementing that within an organization are you probably won't implement all of it, and you'll probably implement something which is a lightweight version of it, which are the things that resonate best with your organization. And what we've done is sort of taken some of the spirit of TOGAF and we've come up with a framework which is some of the things that we think resonate best with, particularly with organizations who don't have any architectural governance today and need to implement it and bring it into their organizations. So it's a lightweight framework. It's based on TOGAF principles, adapted to be more flexible and agile. Looks at the core principles, doesn't overload you with the unnecessary complexity of TOGAF. And as I say, it's ideal for organizations that need to be faster, maybe more streamlined, or don't have anything today. It's built from 4 key areas. So the first area that we look at is architectural principles. So these are the guiding rails, the need for consistency and commonality across all of your technology landscape. So we're going to look at these in more detail in a minute, or we're going to look at all 4 of these sections in more detail in a minute. But you have the architectural principles. So that when you're looking at a new piece of work, those are the things that you're going to consider that piece of work against. So they're the things that are important to you as an organization. Then you've got your as-is architecture. So this is understanding what you have today, and how what you have today meets the business capability need that you have as an organization. So that's looking at very much at, what we have today, why have we got the things that we've got? Maybe you don't know, and that's okay. We can come to that. Then the blueprint for innovation. So sometimes you'll hear architects talk about a reference architecture or a to-be architecture. We don't talk about that. We talk about the blueprint for innovation. So the blueprint for innovation is the ideal state. If you had no constraints at all to what you could do, so there was no legislation, no regulation, you could do what you wanted to do, what your organization wanted to do in terms of your architecture, that is your blueprint for innovation. So it removes all of those constraints, and there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about in the later slide. And then there's roadmaps. So the roadmaps are the plans for how you're going to take what you currently have today and move it towards your blueprint. You won't be able to get there because the blueprint obviously ignores all constraints, which is not practical, but it helps you align with where you want to be in the best way possible. So we look a bit closer at architectural principles. So as I said before, these are the guiding rails that ensure you keep to an agreed set of standards. So they could be based on policy, they could be based on technology strategy, they could be based on business strategy. You know, there's loads of things that you could determine are important enough to you as an organization that you want to create them as architectural principles. And we've got some examples in a minute. So we'll look at those in closer detail. They're important because they allow you to align all of the work that you're doing, whether that's implementing a new piece of software, looking at a complex change that is being pushed through technology, looking at a complex business change that you're looking at, and you're doing maybe some considering whether that change would make sense in your business. It allows you to look at those things and make sure that they're aligned with all of the other elements. So maybe you need to make sure it's aligned with security policy, with technology strategy, with with other guiding rails that you've put there as a business. It should always be evolving. So it's the architectural principles are not set in stone from day one, and you're never going to change them. In fact, we can reach out to Leah in a minute when we look at examples, but with the work we've done with BRE, we change them on a regular basis. They're always evolving and always adapting because businesses are always changing and adapting. So those guiding rails need to move. It's important that they require approval to. I use the word break. You're not really breaking them. If a solution isn't compliant with something that you consider to be an architectural principle, you would want someone to know and understand that, and there's good reason for that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're there to prevent anyone from doing anything that doesn't align to a principle. It's more about understanding that is an informed decision that has been made, so you can document it properly and handle it properly. And they should cover key priorities. They shouldn't go into intricate detail. So something like alignment to development standards, for example, is a good architectural principle, but you wouldn't want every single line in those standards to be a principle in its own right, because obviously that becomes too cumbersome. They need to be fairly lightweight in terms of being able to check against them. So some examples of architectural principles here under different sections, and these sections are just, again, examples. You don't have to have them grouped like this, but there's, for example, technology strategy examples. Like, for example, your technology strategy might say we want everything to be cloud first, we want to put everything in cloud services. They might be operational, so they might be related to how you're having your environment set up, how you test things that are being implemented in the business, what kind of logging you might want. They might be alignment related. So they might align to policy, regulatory, those kind of things. Brand guidelines is another alignment one. Or they might be aspirational. So they might be things that you aspire to achieve, like we want to make sure we've got a single source of the truth, or we have no data duplication in an organization. They are aspirational because they're probably very hard to achieve, but they're still things that you would want to be checking against. So Leah, have you got any sort of comments about any of these? Because obviously I know we do a lot of work on the architectural principles.
Yeah, I mean, some of them might feel a bit common sense, like MFA by default, but we actually had an example where it wasn't MFA by default, and if it hadn't been for the Architectural Governance Board, it may have got through without that, and then we would have come a cropper a little bit further down the line for sure. And also the solution design document is pivotal in this because, again, it seems like something you'd have at the start of any project, but it's the layers that it goes into. And Charlie, you and I did a lot of work on a particular project around the solution design document. And it really supports the infrastructure team when they're building out that to know what they're building and why. So yeah, again, that's been really useful for us.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the importance of design in a minute. So it is an important topic. So moving on from the architectural principles, the as-is architecture. So as I alluded to before, this is about what we've got today. So what do we have in terms of business capabilities and the architecture that supports them? So the focus for producing the as-is architecture really starts with something called a business capability map. So the business capability map is put together by talking to the business and understanding what all the various different business functions do and what their inputs and outputs are, and what is the value that they drive, and then how is that value and those capabilities mapped to the technology landscape that we have. and we map the technology landscape with something called architecture components. So the architecture components, they're basically just a definition of something, whether that's a server or a switch or a cloud service or a piece of data that we store somewhere, or a database itself, or there are lots and lots of architecture components, a security layer. They fit into those 5 categories that we talked about earlier. But you basically build up a list of the architectural components and you map them back to the business capabilities. So you can start to understand the decision making that maybe went on in order to determine why those things exist in your as is architecture. So you can start to say, oh, okay, we've got 4 content management systems, each of which maps to a different business capability. So that might be a problem in the sense that you've now got 4 systems all doing effectively the same job. But they were set up for 4 different business capabilities. But you now understand that problem, so you can start to visualize it and see, oh, okay, well, I can understand why we are where we are today. That allows you to plan for what you're going to do about it in the future. And then we talk about the blueprint for innovation. So this is a vision, and I do reinforce that point. It's a vision of a possible future state. It doesn't look at any technical constraints, legislative, regulatory, and there's good reason for that, because we don't know what the technology constraints that might be put on your land, on your sort of frameworks and your implementations are in the future. Like, technology moves at light speed. Regulation moves slightly slower. Legislation also moves quite slow, but they do change, and they certainly move a lot faster than they ever used to. So for you to try and look at a future state architecture that considers the possible changes in all those things is kind of fruitless and pointless, because you can't predict what's going to happen. But what you can do is say, ignoring all of those things, where do we as an organization want to be? So with all of our priorities and all the things that we want to do, what does our blueprint for innovation look like? Maybe we want to move everything to the cloud. Maybe we want to retain all our data in a certain location. Maybe we want to try and remove all of our data duplication, and we're going to do that by setting up a data warehouse, or wherever the answer is. There is no single right answer to what your blueprint looks like. It's very much driven by yourself. But you need to have this vision so that you can start to look at new projects, new implementations of things that are coming down the path, and how do they map to that blueprint? Because obviously, if they're mapped to the blueprint, then you know that you're moving in the right direction. Then when you come to actually design the solution, you're going to layer on all of the other constraints, and then you'll understand where you've got to make compromises. But there's no point in just trying to sort of design with compromise in mind, because that will limit your ability to innovate quickly. And this informs a more practical architecture. So if you wanted to take this to and align it more to TOGAF and a bigger framework, you can start to layer those practical limitations in, and then you could build up like a target architecture or a to-be architecture, which is more practical. But you don't necessarily need that. In order to make sure you're on the right track, what you need is a blueprint. And that's why we say it's fairly critical to get that in from the start. And then the roadmaps, this is about how do we take what we've got today and how do we move towards the blueprint for innovation? How do we move towards the blueprint for the future? And they're usually in 2 sort of streams. You've usually got a technology-driven roadmap, which is probably from your technology strategy, if you have one. But generally, you will have the people in your technology business will have an understanding of where they want to take the business. Because they'll have drivers that say, we want to reduce cost or whatever it is. We want to increase security. They will drive what the technology roadmap looks like. But then the business will probably have a program and project roadmap about things that they want to do as well. And those 2 things need to work very closely together to make sure that the work that you're doing strategically is aligned to this enterprise architecture, or more importantly, this enterprise architecture is aligned to those things. So I'm just going to touch on a few important elements. So Leah, you touched on this already. So the importance of design. So having no design is like building a house on sand. It's fun until the tide comes in. And I think that's important with this. It's like, if you don't have a design, it's great. I'm sure you can go ahead and implement whatever it is you want to implement. And while that project is in flight and everybody understands what's happening, then that's great. But the minute it goes into operation and it's in BAU and the project isn't there anymore, the tide comes in, washes everything away, all that knowledge is gone. So how do you then look back and say, well, why did we do this? Why did we make these decisions? You know, what do we now do? You will not have the information that you need. So I'm not going to go through all of these sections because you are going to get a copy of this deck, but I'm just going to touch briefly on the main topics. So there are sort of 5 main topics that mean design is important. So clarity and alignment is a big one. So having a documented design, make sure that all of the stakeholders, from the technical teams to the business leaders, have a clear understanding of a system. So that's really important, particularly in the early days of a piece of work. Consistency and standardization. So by documenting all of the design choices that you make, you're going to promote consistency. You're going to have smoother transition between the various different teams who might be involved. So if you're not in like a DevOps environment, maybe you're much more traditional and you have like you're going to implement something and then you're going to hand it over to like a BAU team to support. Obviously, being able to have everything documented and well understood is going to help with that transition. But this is also where your architectural principles come into play. So you can look at a design and you can assess it against your architectural principles before you've even built anything. You can understand whether it's aligned to your direction of travel, and that's really important. And that's a key part of the architectural governance board that you'll need to implement to keep all this on track, is that they can be looking at, have we reviewed the designs? Are the designs aligned to architectural principles? Are we on track? Are we doing the right things? Designs also help facilitate change and scalability. So your organization is going to grow, it's going to change, it's going to adapt. And if you don't have a good design for the implementations that you've got, then you won't be able to understand how those things can scale. So we have a template for a solution design document, and it doesn't have to be a document. It can be any way of capturing that information, but we do have a template for capturing a solution design. And obviously a big part of it is understanding how will this solution adapt, change, scale. If the unexpected happens and we suddenly get 10 times more users than we were expecting, is this going to work still? If our business is in a different place next year than it is today, is that still going to work? And then compliance and risk management. So again, we touched on this before, but regulation, legislation, compliance, ensuring that your solutions are aligned with all of the things that you need to comply with. Obviously, if you've designed it properly, you can record exactly how that alignment exists, and that you make sure that you've checked off the right things, make sure you've covered the right areas. And then the last one is about identifying technical debt. So having accurate designs allows you to identify where you might have technical debt. So we're going to talk on technical debt in a minute, and I'll bring Leah in again as well, because technical debt's been really important to the work we've been doing with BRE. But we're not here as an architectural governance board necessarily to prevent you from doing anything. We're here to make sure that decisions have been made with the right thought processes, the right inputs, the right information. And quite often those decisions come to, well, we understand that there's an architectural principle and a strategy and a policy that says we're going to do this, but for good reason, we've looked at all that and we can't do that at the moment. With this particular release, implementation, software version, whatever it is, we can't meet that. And that is technical debt. And so having designs allows you to identify that stuff. And it's invaluable for the governance board to be able to understand the technical debt that the business is carrying, because that allows you to bring in mechanisms to sort of fix it. So this slide sort of covers off like what I just described, but basically technical debt is the shortcuts or suboptimal solutions that you make during implementation that allow for faster delivery. And the reason we call it technical debt is because you're basically borrowing time by deferring some work that you need to do. So maybe you need to improve the architecture, maybe you need to update the software to a new version, whatever it happens to be. Eventually that borrowed time has to be paid back. In fact, it's usually paid back with interest. So the analogy to debt makes sense in this context. So we call it technical debt. And there are a bunch of hidden costs to technical debt. So Leah, do you want to come in at this point and just talk a bit about technical debt? 'Cause I know this is an area that we've been focusing on fairly recently with BRE because we've done a few implementations through this process now, and so technical debt has become a real thing for us.
Yeah, the good thing about the way we've approached it with the transformation that we're doing is that it's all logged. So we accept it, like you said, Charlie, it's very unlikely that you'll go ahead with the project and there won't be some technical debt. But if we look at some of our existing developments and products from maybe sort of 5-10 years ago, they've still got technical debt associated with them, because it's one of those things, a little bit like documentation, you get round to it and then it never actually happens. So having this framework means that we're recording the technical debt at the point of reviewing the solution, and then we have regular reviews, and then should we add either an update or a patch, or we're going into the next phase of development, we reassess that technical debt. So it never becomes something that just builds up. We are bringing it back to the forefront and making sure that we examine it and can pay it off, as it were.
Yeah, because it's really easy for people to just say, oh yeah, we'll just call that technical debt and we'll move on, and then never revisit it. So it's like, how do you then make sure that that's not a way for people to sneak things in or to implement things which are not aligned to what you would want? So making sure we revisit that technical debt at the start of the next project really allows us to starts to make people accountable for the decisions that they make. So if they decide they're not going to implement that and they have good reason for it, maybe that reason is timeline related or budget related. If you can reintroduce that technical debt at the start of the next time we come to do any work in that area, then those arguments of timeline and budget then cease to be valid, because you can revisit, you've got a new project, you can revisit timeline and budget at that point. So it allows people to be a lot more accountable for the decisions that they make around implementing things which aren't quite aligned to the strategy. But it's very important that you identify and prioritize technical debt during reviews. So during the Architectural Governance Board can take responsibility for this in different ways, but ultimately you want to be reviewing all of the implementations that are being made. So whether that's a change or a project or whatever it happens to be, and you want to make sure that you're reviewing those against the principles early on, and you're identifying where you're likely to have technical debt. Certainly in the early days, and when we come to getting started, we can talk about this, but in the early days, the sort of elephant in the room is that when I want to implement architectural governance, we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff that's in flight. And so you obviously have to accept that you're probably from day one going to inherit a whole bunch of technical debt that's consciously or unconsciously already been agreed, because you already set budgets, set timelines, things are in flight, things are going to be implemented, and probably they're not aligned to all of the architectural principles you might want. So when you set this up initially, you're probably going to inherit a lot of architectural debt. So I'm going to sort of involve Leah a little bit more now in terms of talking about how we've had some success in terms of implementing this lightweight framework with BRE. So we're going to sort of talk about it in these two key areas. But if I sort of hand over to you at this point, Leah, do you want to talk to these sort of areas, and I'll chip in as and when?
Yeah, sure. So we're going through a business-wide digital transformation at BRE. So we did have quite a few things in flight when we brought in the Architectural Governance Board, and it was just really important for us that as we were building out our infrastructure and our architecture, we had a clear framework and strategy of where we wanted to be. Most of you will know that it's so easy to build a Frankenstein's monster version of systems. And so we were trying to avoid that with this. And having the Architectural Governance Board meant we were much more thoughtful about how we approach either a new project or a new system request. So it's given us that robustness to not only look at the new things that are coming on board, but as time goes on, looking at existing products and services as well, and bringing the teams on board with that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I mean, it's so, yeah, it's obviously we've had a lot of success with with implementing the AGB with you guys at BRE. So what were some of the sort of benefits of implementing it and like the opportunities that came up out of it?
Yeah, so when we started, the Architectural Governance Board was set up. We had weekly meetings because we had so much that we needed to get through. And we did it in partnership with Cielo Costa. I don't have an architect in my team, and we didn't have some of the necessary expertise. So what worked really well is that at that point in time, Cielo Costa ceases to become Cielo Costa and they become BRE. So the Architectural Governance Board is run by and supported by BRE, but we have some technical heads from Cielo Costa, and that has actually worked really well. It's been run really professionally. We've had terms of reference that we've all agreed to. We integrate also with our Information Governance Board. We've got that expertise from the team. It's really robust. So as maybe some of you on this call work with Cielo Costa on certain things, we also work with Cielo Costa on some developments, but that doesn't mean that they get any different treatment through the Architectural Governance Board in terms of, you know, do they have a proper solution design and do they adhere to all the architectural principles? So that's been really robust. They've held themselves to account as strongly as they would hold anybody else to account. So you feel like you're getting best practice and an agnostic view. The Architectural Governance Board also, because of where it sits, it's not biased towards any particular area. So we sit outside of IT or our transformation and change office. So we have that governance piece, and we're not there to block. I think at the start, a lot of people thought that they were going to have to go through a lot of red tape, but actually it's to make sure that what we're trying to achieve through our projects is where we want to be. So it's guiding lights, as you mentioned earlier, Charlie, it's guiding principles. And it also allows us never to make assumptions about how things are going to be designed and developed. We can sense check new things that are coming through against our existing architecture. And it's just been a really good opportunity as well for people in the organisation to learn more about this and to bring that best practice in. So as I said at the start, we were very much focused on our very new in-flight projects that were part of the digital transformation. But the software development team that sits in-house also has been very keen to make sure that for anything existing, they've been bringing the architectural governance principles across to what they're doing as well. So we're starting to get that alignment across the organisation.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I think you made a couple of important points for me, which relate to, as a consultancy business that's helping you set up an enterprise architecture framework, it's very, very important to us that this is seen as a company initiative and not a consultancy piece that's being done by a third party. So obviously, yeah, we went to a lot of trouble to make sure that, you know, even just simple things like if we're emailing someone internally about a particular project or implementation, just that email comes from a BRE email address with a footer that says Architectural Governance Board, not, you know, Cielo Costa, because in the early days, we understand that companies don't necessarily have the mechanisms, the resources and the capabilities to roll this out. But it's really important to us that we're setting something up that has a long life that we can transfer to you to adopt and run, and not something that if we weren't there anymore, so say tomorrow we weren't there anymore supporting AGB would still run, the governance model would still work and everything would still function the way it has. It's just that we wouldn't be running it, you'd be run independently, and that's really, really important in terms of how we set these things up. It's not us doing it for you, it's us helping you do it, and that's really important.
The architectural principles as well weren't given to us. We worked together as a board to decide what our priorities were. So all of the architectural principles that BRE owned, and we've signed them off and said, yes, this is what we want to apply to our organisation.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Leah. That was really useful. So I'm just going to very quickly discuss this slide because this covers off a couple of the areas that are important around getting started, but obviously there's a lot more to do, but I'm just going to touch on some of the key things to get going. So the first point is you need to start with an understanding of the core principles of enterprise architecture governance. So actually, you could probably put a tick in the box and say you've attended this webinar. I think that's going to help in terms of understanding some of the things that need to be done. So you're already on the right path. The most important first step is to establish an architectural governance board. So you need an internal governance mechanism in order to run this. There's work that needs to be done. There are priorities. There are things that need to be agreed and delivered. You need a mechanism to do it. So the first two things you probably need to do are, and these are very important, is first of all, you need to identify who are the people who are going to participate in AGB. Who are they? What are their roles? And they really need to be at least, so they don't need to all be senior stakeholders, but you definitely need the buy-in from senior stakeholders. So in the example of BRE, we obviously have Leah, who chairs the AGB. So we have a direct line in to the exec within BRE and then obviously into the board. So we're within the terms of reference of the AGB at BRE, it's established where that sits, where the board sits in terms of its escalation paths, but also its position in the process. So that's the first thing to get right, because if you want to bring this into your organization and you haven't already got buy-in from senior stakeholders, that's important to go and get first of all. So to establish that you've got the buy-in, that the need is there and that it's understood why you need to do it. And then you can write the terms of reference around what that architectural governance board is going to do. So we helped BRE to write this initial terms of reference, but it needed to be something that they could then take and run without our input. So obviously it was written very much around, right, okay, so how's this going to work within the constructs of BRE, within your organisational governance? And then it would have legs of its own. Once the actual board is in place, the first thing to do is to start to draw out what does current world landscape look like. So you need to start building that as is architecture. And there are three key work streams that you need to start off in the early days. So you need to define your architectural principles. So like Leah alluded to, that's a very collaborative thing. We can help you understand some of the sort of more basic things that are like kind of every organization should have. And then there's going to be a bunch of things which are very much, what kind of industry are you in? What's your business strategy? They're then going to get built up from those things. Alongside that, start to build your business capability map. And you can document, like I can give you examples of what one looks like, but ultimately it's up to you what you capture and how you capture it. But essentially you need to understand what your business does, and therefore what you therefore need technology to support. And then you start to look at mapping your technology components into that. So that would be the third stage, mapping those bits. Once you've got that picture drawn, then you can start to looking at change that's going on through the business and aligning it to the architectural principles, and then understanding whether or not that you are making the kinds of changes that you want to be making. And then you can start to look at the blueprint for innovation later. So I would say you don't necessarily need that blueprint for innovation in order to get started. What you really need to do is understand what current landscape looks like and what your architectural principles are to help you drive that change. So for example, with BRE, we haven't got to the blueprint for innovation yet. It's very much that's going to be a focus going forward. What we've been doing so far is very much this getting started piece around stabilizing what we have and understanding what the as-is architecture looks like today. I'm now going to hand over to Ollie, who's our sales and marketing lead, just going to give you a bit of an introduction to us as a business, and to wrap up things really.
Cool. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Leah, for your time so far. And yeah, we'll give a couple of minutes just about ourselves, and we're also going to go and move on to Q&A. So if you haven't had a chance to write any questions, and you've got any burning questions for Charlie or Leah based on what they talked about today, feel free to pop those into the Q&A in the Teams meeting. That would be great. But while you do that, a little bit about us. So Cielo Costa, we're 8 years old. Gone from a team of 6 back in 2016 to over 50 today, and we're a global fully remote team. So Most of our senior leadership is in the UK, but we've also got a team across 4 continents globally. And, for example, we've got a really strong QA team in the Far East, and our sort of marketing lead, Shah, is in Norway. So we're quite geographically disparate. But yeah, the majority of the senior team is in the UK. And in terms of the sort of challenges that our customers come to us about, typically they're facing operational inefficiencies that cost them time and money or create business risk. And as a technology partner, we're here to help try and solve some of those problems from a technology perspective. And I guess there's sort of 4 key areas really that we can help in. There's technology consultancy and implementation, so actually looking at big projects like enterprise architecture, for example, looking at how we can actually help with that from a consultancy point of view, and actually then how we can implement some of those changes to make things happen. We have more specific software solutions, so those might be very specific problems, for example, legacy systems of paper or non-cloud approach to things, where actually you need to become more efficient and move to a software-driven cloud-first approach to actually drive performance in terms of saving time or increasing compliance or increasing security, things like that. So really specific software pieces of work. We have ongoing services as well, so support and continuous improvement, which is just ongoing support, managed services, just to keep things not just ticking along, but improving over time as well. And I guess the last thing is we're very strong in Microsoft. We're a Microsoft Cloud solutions partner. So often companies will be coming to us to look at a specific Microsoft solution that can help meet some of their business challenges. So there's a range of areas we can help with. Thanks, Charlie. And then in terms of the customers we work with, we're quite broad. We're very established names. You'll recognise some of them here. So we're very strong in construction solutions, but also in retail, in healthcare, in finance, and most of our customers are UK based, but they're often global organisations with global footprints around the world. And we've also got presence in the Middle East from a Kuwait Investment Authority perspective as well, for example. So often they're big, well-established companies, and the result of being big and well-established is often some of their structure and architecture really needs support from a technology point of view to help them sort of progress and transform digitally. Thanks, Charlie. So what we've looked at today, just high level, just that overview of what enterprise architecture is, our lightweight approach to make that manageable, make that faster, the critical importance of handling technical debt and managing that, and proper design, a real case study, a bit of an example from Leah on how we've actually made that work and are still continuing to make that work moving forward at BRE. A couple of ideas about how you can get that started in your organisation, and what a next step might be to move towards AGB, for example, if that's relevant for you and your organisation. And finally, just a couple of slides about us ourselves. So hopefully that was useful. We'd love to talk to you more about your challenges, either in the EA regard or more generally around some of the solutions I mentioned a moment ago. If that could be of interest, if you haven't already met myself and Charlie, we'd love to have a conversation about your particular business challenges and if there's anywhere areas we can help with. So our contact details are here, and obviously we'll be following up as well with a short email. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to discuss things further. That's it from me. I think we're now going to have a look at Q&A to see if there's any questions that people have got.
We have got 2 questions by the looks of it. So I think probably one of these I can handle, and maybe one, Leah, maybe you could have some input too. So the first one is typically how long does it take to set up a process like this, from defining the principles to it being business as usual? How long did it take for BRE? So Leah, do you want to take that one, seeing as it's specifically BRE related?
Sure. I mean, we stood this up quite quickly because we'd already done the buy-in piece. So, and like I said when I spoke earlier, we had architectural governance board meetings every week because we were keen to work our way through the projects that we had, get the principles set up. So I think it really depends on your own ability to put time aside from this. I mean, you can give a lot of the heavy lifting to Cielo Costa. It is really flexible. So it depends how much involvement or how much of the reins you want to take, but it can be a very, very quick win. And with the architectural principles and the terms of reference, the terms of reference can be supplied. The architectural principles could be supplied if that's what you want. We started from scratch because we wanted to, but we were still able, I would say, probably within 2 months, we had all the architectural principles signed off, and we'd already assigned architects from Cielo Cluster to start reviewing our projects.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think it's one of those how long's a piece of string questions, isn't it? Because it does depend on your organizational agility. So how quick can your organization move? Like if you've already got senior buy-in, which we did at BRE, we already had the buy-in from senior stakeholders. So actually producing the terms of reference was pretty quick, wasn't it? We turned that around fairly fast. Like Leah said, they wanted to start from scratch with the architectural principles, but we could have done that quicker had we started from a baseline set and just said, right, here's a standard set, let's tweak as we go. So I think we can get it going really quickly as long as some of the key bits are in place already. But what will make it take slightly longer is if you need to go and get external buy-in, so you need to convince senior stakeholders that this is something that needs to be done, and then it might take a while to understand, well, where does it sit in our process? How do we implement it? So it is a lot going to depend on your organisation, but if you're ready, willing, and have the buy-in, then it can be implemented very quickly. The next question is around actually sort of some of the practical stuff. So it's, do you have suggestions on how to manage the process? How and where to capture the different elements of this approach? For example, how are the architectural principles, technical debt, etc. captured and communicated at BRE? Does it require additional software or licenses? So I think the answer to that is very much there is no set way. There's no defined, right, you must do it in this technology and you must use this particular setup and it's therefore going to cost you X in licenses or anything else. In the example of BRE, they already had Microsoft 365 licenses. We set up an AGB team in Microsoft Teams. We utilized the SharePoint site that came with that to create a number of lists and libraries, and those are used to manage the different elements. So we have a governance list, which is where we manage all of the projects and programs, pieces of work that are being looked at by the AGB architects. And we manage that process within that governance list. We also have obviously the design documentation that's being produced and reviewed. So that obviously gets stored in SharePoint as well. The as-is architecture is also stored in SharePoint. So the business capability map is a SharePoint list and the architectural components are defined in SharePoint. But a lot of that is because BRE are Microsoft consumers. They have Microsoft licenses and therefore there's no additional cost to utilizing SharePoint to set those things up. So it's the easiest way. But there are off-the-shelf products that you can buy in that allow you to do this stuff, but they all have a cost associated with them. And again, this lightweight approach that we're proposing here is about being lean, it's about being efficient, it's about organizations that don't necessarily have a lot of time and money to invest in enterprise architecture, but they have a need for it because they like some of those problem statements that we put at the start, they really resonate with lots of organizations today, and this can really help. So if there's a way of doing it that limits license cost, that limits time to implement, then obviously this kind of lightweight framework would look to leverage those as much as possible. So hopefully that answered that question. If there aren't any other questions in the Q&A, I don't think. Obviously, if anybody thinks of any additional questions, then you've got mine and Ollie's contact details in the slides. So those are going to be distributed after the event. So obviously you'll be able to get in touch with us, message us on LinkedIn, drop us an email, give us a call, and we can obviously give you a bit more information or answer any specific questions. Sometimes it's difficult to ask a general question if it's very specific to your organizational setup. And so we're quite happy to have those conversations in private, and not share them on a webinar if need be. Otherwise, I think we're probably at an end. Ollie, is there anything else you want to add? Or
no, just thanks to everyone. Thanks first of all, Charlie and Leah, for your time today. It was really interesting. I hope everyone felt the same. Thanks to our guests for attending. We appreciate you giving up nearly an hour of your time this morning. I know everyone's very busy, so thank you for making the time and effort to come along, and hopefully you found some of what we said interesting and valuable. Just to reiterate, great to talk to you. If it's relevant for you guys to talk about any of your challenges, that would be amazing. Otherwise, we'll share this recording with you, so you can share that with your wider teams, and we'll also have a sort of a 1 or 2 pager as well in a sort of condensed format over the next couple of days to share as well. So hopefully those assets will be useful for you and for your wider teams. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.